our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Interpretation. We have devices on the back side of the room. Muchas gracias por la paciencia, estamos retomando la jornada de la tarde. Yo quisiera invitar al panel a Ignacio Álvarez, exrelator de Libertad de Expresión, a Erin Barclay de Dear All. Muchas gracias por estar acá. José Zamora, por favor. Juan Lorenzo Holman y Berta Michelle Mendoza. Este panel se titula Muerte, exilio y encarcelamiento, y tiene que ver con una frase muy poderosa que le dijeron hace poco a la relatoría, en la que nos indicaban que pareciera que el destino de la prensa en riesgo es el encierro, el destierro.
We're unable thus far to be able to avoid self-censorship, because that's the ultimate effect of what goes on, of what you're describing. But in the context of Guatemala, Juan Carlos, how can journalists and the media outlets adapt to be able to continue to report safely and effectively, if there is such a way to do so, and with regard to, and also in answer it in terms of the social networks as well. Firstly, I think it's the job of every journalist, and the work of all journalists in Guatemala is admirable. They're under such pressure to subject themselves to self-censorship, and what's happened there is there's more solidarity and support in the professional association. That's two things that we should follow. Is that one thing is collaborative journalism projects and partnerships within the country and outside with other media outlets outside of the country, which can help on this in the same day, same hour, can engage in the same investigation from outside that the national media is doing, and also a lot of partnership, collaboration, and solidarity. We have to have these security contingencies in place. And I know it's complex, but it's just it's the best defense for journalists. It's the only way. And with regard to the network, social networks, is to speak out against this and call it for what it is, to trying to muzzle the press, trying to put a gag the voice of the press. Thank you very much. So we also have another issue, the post-electoral issue. You were mentioning the office of the prosecutor, and together with judges, how they're sort of in cahoots. And then this leads to an institutional problem. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And this, of course, is important in terms of freedom of expression. Would you like to respond to this? But we want to first bring up is that this criminal structure that was created under the public prosecutor's office, within as part of the judiciary, I believe that this structure no less, has been used to prosecute all members of the opposition. No one is safe. Even the president-elect, who hasn't come in office yet, he is a major target. And so things are going to start to change. Yamate, it's not really at his direction. I think they're going to be getting out. They're going to be leaving. And so this will be corrected, is what I'm saying. This will be rectified. And so the judges, once again, are going to go back to being impartial and adhere to the law. Abide by the rules and the law, and all this illegal prosecution and persecution, legal persecution, so to speak, is going to come to an end, because it's systematically infected all democratic institutions up to this point under this administration. There's never been so many people in exile as there have been under the administration of Yamate. There's around 80 individuals who are in exile, among prosecutors, judges, journalists, counting them all, among them all, and journalists, some of the most honorable, honest people in the country, judges, prosecutors, and journalists, and they were compelled to either go to jail or go into exile. That was the only choice that was left. Okay. We hope it gets better. I hope so. Okay, thank you very much for your remarks. and for shedding light on what's going on in Guatemala, and particularly in terms of freedom of expression. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
So, Erin Berkeley, senior official for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor of the U.S. Department of State. Welcome, Erin. Thank you very much for attending the invitation, and you have the floor. Up to you.
I'll just sit if that's okay. So good morning, or good afternoon, my goodness, it's already feels like tomorrow morning. It's very, very nice to be here with you all. I know you have, this is towards the end of day 2 of your sessions, so I will try to be succinct and welcome a discussion if there's time for that. So I am, just to orient you to who I am and what I do, and then I have some remarks I do want to share with you. I am in the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau of the State Department, and we are the sort of main location, you could say, the belly button of the State Department on democracy and human rights issues, in particular as it relates to activists and activism around the world. And so this is a part of the U.S. government and is the lead at the State Department for providing assistance, support, to speak up on behalf, to use multilateral diplomacy, bilateral diplomacy, to bring all of the tools that we have in our toolkit to bear on creating space for democracy and human rights activists and activism around the world, including in the Western Hemisphere. So I just say that because in listening to Mr. Zamora, it strikes me that much of what we are seeing happen in the Western Hemisphere, we are seeing happen globally. He's not wrong that this is a pattern of closing space for journalists, but for activists more broadly around the world. So what I'd like to do is just give you a sense of our view on the issue set and go through some of the tools that the U.S. government brings to bear on this. So let me just, I probably don't have to go in to describe the issue, to describe the challenge, right? I think probably in this room, maybe we can just all agree we know what the challenge is. So I think what I'm going to do is basically leave it at, we see journalists and independent media and freedom of expression as a core part of any society rooted and based in the rule of law. And we come to work every day where I am to seek out space and to use the tools that the U.S. government can bring to make sure that there is space for journalists and for activists across the board. I was talking to Mr. Zamora about his father and his father's case. This is, of course, one that we have been very focused on for some time and will continue, as I said to him, we'll continue to, louder, we'll continue to be raising his father's case. So let me just talk about a couple of the things that we do to support activists and independent media on the ground. Number one, we support and fund the ongoing work of the Inter-American Commission's Unit for Human Rights Defenders and its Office of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, as well as the new Center for Media Integrity in the Americas, which, as many of you probably already know, serves as a hub to support fact-based, rigorous journalism and to disseminate that. This is, as I said, part of our broader U.S. government global strategy to support press freedom and to protect independent journalism. In addition to the OAS, we raise these issues across multilateral forums, including the UN Human Rights Council, in the Summit of the Americas process, in our Summit for Democracy process, as well as various what we call multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Media Freedom Coalition, the Freedom Online Coalition, which the U.S. government is chairing this year, and others that we're involved in to shine a light on this problem and to rally other countries to this cause. This year, we were proud to join fellow OAS delegations to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Commission's Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. The creation of that, this was a very important outcome in our mind of the Summit of the Americas process, and we were pleased to host the 9th Summit, of course, in Los Angeles. We had the pleasure, the privilege really, of welcoming some of our colleagues from Nicaragua earlier this year. These are partners who we have had for many years in Nicaragua, the 222 activists who thank you for joining us today. And so we do this type of work as well. We have a lot of, we bring resources to the table in the space of rapid response, right? So journalist is in danger, needs to get out. Activist is being persecuted, needs to be moved, needs, training on commercial spyware and these sorts of newer threats to journalists. So we're able to bring those types of resources as well. One of the other things that I want to make sure you are aware of is we have the opportunity to bring different types of sanctions tools to the table. So these are sanctions for human rights abuses. These are visa restrictions, so people can't come into this country. And this is a regular part of our work every day. I won't go into specific cases here, but we're the locus in the State Department for those types of human rights related sanctions actions that you hear the U.S. government taking. One of our jobs as diplomats is to raise these issues publicly, and we do that vocally in all the forums I mentioned, but in other places as well. For example, at the 2021 RightsCon conference in Costa Rica, our Undersecretary for Civilian Security was there, and she went specifically to raise the issue of media freedom and independent journalism and online expression as part of the U.S. taking over the chairship of the Freedom Online Coalition. Let me just mention one other thing, and then I will close. And I would be very interested in your thoughts during this discussion on this, which is how we are dealing with and need to continue to deal with the issue of commercial spyware. I think that this is a challenge that I'm not sure we have our arms around within the U.S. government, and we need advice and guidance from people who are dealing with this issue every day as part of their work and as part of their lives. Within the U.S. government, as you may know, under the Biden administration, there is sort of a government-wide approach to countering the misuse of commercial spyware, including restrictions on the U.S. government's own use of this and working with allies and partners in this region and around the world to try to bring other governments on board to both restrict their own use of commercial spyware for ways, of course, that violate human rights, but in general, and then to be able to take that out into the world to pressure those who use that as a tool of repression in a more collective way globally. The last thing I'll leave you with is my bureau has launched a new program called the Journalism Protection Platform, and this is meant to promote and respect open and resilient information ecosystems. This is, again, funding. This is connections with journalists in similar situations around the world, both in this region and globally. So I'll just leave it at that. I hope what you take away from my participation is that we are a partner. We are a resource in the U.S. government. As I said, we come to work every day to work on creating space for journalists and activists to do their work on the ground. That's what we do in Washington all the time. So let me leave it at that, and I'll turn it back.
Thank you very much, Erin. Follow up on your presentation. See that you could observe like patterns of violations similar in different regions of the world. Yeah. And we have a lot of impunity in the region. Have you seen some good practices in relation to fighting impunity in other regions of the world?
This is, this is the crux of the challenge of doing foreign policy, right? Is how you ensure that rights-respecting behavior and actions are part of our broader relationship with governments around the world. And I think one of the things, I'm a career official at the State Department, so I stay through various political transitions. And so, you know, I would say one of the things I have seen during the Biden administration, and it certainly has been a stated priority of this administration, is the desire to center our foreign policy, center democracy and human rights in our foreign policy, which is of course easier said than done. But that means figuring out how to balance this issue set with the broader relationship that we have with these countries. And so this is all part of what we do every day in terms of influencing decisions that are made about the broader relationship with governments that might not be the best actors in this space, right? So if I think about good examples, I don't want to call out any particular countries because, you know, sometimes that gets me in trouble. So, but I would say that we have seen both in the Summit for Democracy process, which I had the opportunity to be involved with, as well as through different multilateral settings, the Human Rights Council and other places. We have seen new and emerging democracies come more into the fold of rights-respecting behavior, I think in every region of the world. But it is very hard with the threats and the inducements of other countries who aren't rights-respecting to pull those countries back into their orbit. So much of the work that we all have to do, I think, is to pull those governments back into the rule of law orbit. And so without naming any countries, I guess I would say I can think of examples in every region of the world, but I'm not going to go into specifics, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble.
Thank you very much. Juan Lorenzo Holman, buenas tardes, bienvenido.
No, Mr. Holman, General Manager of the IDEO of Nicaragua. Mr. Holman, you've been in prison, you've been convicted, you've faced prison time. There were precautionary measures were granted to you from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and in the end, here you are in exile. You're the only one in your who's paid a price for exercising freedom of expression. You're not. That is, you're not the only one. That is because your uncle, for example, who's the ex-editor-in-chief of La Prensa, was murdered by a different dictatorship. So we want to express our gratitude to you for your presence at this event. And I'd like to ask you to pose the following question to you. In view of the current context of Nicaragua, where freedom of expression is severely repressed, where are media blackout areas, and the coverage by independent media is practically non-existent. And so, how do you see the future of Nicaragua? With this, what strategy can be used by journalists to be able to cope with this state of play? Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to share our experience and our ideas. I want to correct one thing. It wasn't a trial. This isn't a trial. It was a circus. It was a kangaroo court. And so I met my defense attorney the day of the kangaroo court trial. And we had to come to an agreement about what my defense would be in a fraction of a second, in 3 minutes.
Bottom line, ain't no such thing as justice in Nicaragua. It's simply not there. Nor is there such a thing as independent journalism. The question is, how many journalists have left Nicaragua, or how many are left in Nicaragua? I would tell you that every independent journalist is long since out, for the simple reason that there is not a single newspaper that would consider itself independent that could survive. It just doesn't exist, ain't there? And I was listening to Pedro Joaquin, our good friend, who said at one point, without freedom of press, even the right to life is diminished. And that surely is the case today in Nicaragua. The right to life itself is flickering, because it's fair to ask, what good is living if you're scared to death to speak up? Never mind take the next breath, and you're unsure of that. If there is no means of expression, what life is there? I can only remember the comment of a good friend and colleague who used to work on La Prensa. And that harks back to the question that you've just put to me. What is the future of journalism in Nicaragua? Well, in an article published, as a matter of fact, today in La Prensa, let me pull it up. Here it is. She states, and I quote, perhaps what worries me most is the minutes left to journalism in this country, because a friend commented just recently that journalism is not imperiled. It's in a state of coma. It is comatose. And for all of us who are between 30 and 40 years, that rings very painfully. And we think that it is, in fact, on a respirator that journalism can even be mentioned in Nicaragua. It's there in name only, because the numbers of journalists that have fled into exile from Nicaragua are those who have simply had to drop journalism. I will tell you that Nicaragua has become a desert wherein there are very, very few journalists, very, very few communicators. Those of us who could claim to be the voice of Nicaragua in exile know, as the song says, that it is costing us blood, sweat, and tears. And that is not hyperbole, alas. Where democracy exists more than in name only, other things are possible. But in Nicaragua, that's not the case. There are journalists who have left into exile and have had to drop working as journalists because they were not stronger than all of the bats of hell that were persecuting them, not least because of their terror at thinking the danger of their family back home. And by the way, that danger is very well rooted. I'm not a criminal. Many who have left are. And what is occurring is that too many of the neighboring sister republics have criminalized journalism. There's a simple reason for this. The aim is to muzzle us. The aim is to emasculate us. The aim is to annihilate us altogether. Nobody wants in Nicaragua anyone who takes a critical look at what's going on. Now, some of us say, we are the future. And I say that to my brothers and sisters in the rest of Central America, the Hondurans, the Costa Ricans, the Panamanians, and even to the Costa Ricans, let me say. The encroachment of totalitarian governments and the speed at which they are taking root is terrifying. And as Jose was saying a minute ago, with a manual on authoritarianism in one hand, and let me tell you, Ortega didn't write it because Ortega is illiterate, but it's those who put it in practice that are most to be feared. But everybody else falls into line. They all fall into line. And they continue to import laws that are now in Nicaragua, having been imported from Russia to the last dot and tittle, wherein, for instance, it is boldly stated that the very mention of corruption in government is a crime against the state and a crime against the homeland. What possible future can journalism have in such a condition? It is no surprise that there are no journalists left. Those who were practicing that profession either died or left, and there's surely no young people who dare for an instant think of journalism because there's no future in it. And they sometimes say flat out, are you kidding? With the pennies that people are paid, we're going to risk our lives? I don't think so. A very few continue to wish or hope that they could continue because they feel in their marrow that, well, I won't be the first to be exiled, the first to be thrown in jail, but I can only hope to be the last one to be so, not only in Nicaragua, but throughout Central America. I hope I am the last one to suffer exile and persecution. I don't know what is harder, quite frankly, whether jail or exile. Let me tell you, the only difference between jail and exile is that in exile, at least I can continue raising my voice and speaking my heart and giving the best I possibly can give within the industry that I know, which is journalism, so that the people in Nicaragua can hear the truth from somewhere. And I will do so to my last breath, with the help of all of you who might wish to help in that endeavor. It certainly is a just cause. It is a battle that we in Nicaragua, and we're not alone, there are numbers of other authoritarian governments throughout the planet, but we are all suffering this.
Muchas gracias, Juan Lorenzo. Vamos a hacer.
Thank you so very much. We are going to have only one round of questions, and so allow me this follow-up query. You, I believe, benefited from precautionary measures that the Inter-American Court dictated with regard to the situation in Nicaragua. And so having benefited from the issuance of that ruling from the court, and more especially with regard to the Special Rapporteurship for Freedom of Expression, might I ask you, what can you share with the international community with regard to the present circumstances of Nicaragua? Or put differently, what suggestions might you dare make with regard to Nicaragua in that regard? Well, first of all, with regard to those precautionary measures, let me say I am deeply grateful for them. But let me also tell you, alas and alack, they don't work with perverse governments. I regret myself, says the speaker, not perverse governments, but perverse dictatorships. Precautionary measures have been fashioned so that the protective state can protect the individual. But where the main perpetrator of injustice is the government itself, where are you going to go? That does not in any way diminish my gratitude for all of the efforts that have been deployed. Certainly, if no effort is made, nothing's going to work. Efforts that are made may or may not work, or may work less well than one might wish. perhaps there's room to say there needs to be a more emphatic or more direct or less subtle expression that a government like Nicaragua might begin to notice. Let me tell you something. This year, 222 foreign exiles left Nicaragua and came into an airplane, a U.S. airplane, which afforded us that plane and gave us a temporary immigration status through the humanitarian program, and that is why I'm here. They brought us, and while we were flying, already on the ground, the government in Nicaragua had declared us stateless. We were no longer Nicaraguans in their view. And what was the response of a number of governments vis-a-vis that crime against humanity? Others said, oh, we'll give you citizens so that you won't be stateless. But none of them, and do forgive me for my bluntness, and I surely don't wish to sound ungrateful. This comes from the heart. No government spoke out against the action of the dictatorship of Nicaragua. It was a crime against humanity. No one had the guts to tell it like it was. They simply didn't say it. It went unsaid and untold. There should have been a public outcry and a sanction to follow. That crime against humanity. And by the way, another 97 individuals were also declared stateless. And as I speak, that is ongoing vis-a-vis every one of our family members who leave Nicaragua and who are then truly stateless because they aren't being offered alternate citizenship. So I say yes, indeed, and forgive me for this bluntness. It comes from pain as well as lucidity. The international community is doing a lot, but it grieves me to say it's not enough. Why is it not enough? Because Daniel Ortega and his infamous wife, continue acting in the stateless way they do because nobody says no, nobody says enough. Nobody calls out their criminal actions. Not in the country, because they risk their lives, and not anybody outside either, it grieves me to say. No public outcry. Jean-Michel Mendoza, well-known, a very well-known Spanish journalist who is well-known nationally and internationally for her programs. A very committed activist who has spoken repeatedly in favor of journalists that are persecuted and, I dare say, prosecuted in Guatemala. We hear very tough talk, and I'd like to ask, what, in your view, should the media do to try to ensure a free and fair post-electoral milieu in a context of such tremendous restriction? Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation, and secondly, let me speak out here in solidarity with all of my colleagues still in Guatemala that are suffering day by day this unfolding of the drama and the grievance of the dictatorship of Mate, which very much reflects what my friend just said. And when I consider what the press has done in Guatemala, I must say this is not for cowards. Given the dictatorship that Jean Mate has followed, means, let's be very clear, that he not only has the whole of the state, capital S, and every one of the courts, capital C, behind him, he also has all of the criminal elements in Guatemala that have every means possible, not only to destroy individuals and take their life, but to destroy them while they're still alive. Let me tell you something, that it's hard to be a journalist in Guatemala, no question. If you're a female, good luck, because your gender will be used as a journalist, as a mother, as a daughter, as a female Guatemalan citizen. And one example of this is myself. Not to be narcissistic, but I can tell you that over the last years, this is not days or months, years, I have been a scapegoat. I have been directly targeted. And I think it was probably between April or May 2015 when I was covering a situation, the arrival of Roxana Valdetti to court. And that day, in an attempt to dissuade what was happening, this was the first time that a vice president was being hauled into court. I have to tell you, I was groped and grasped by people in the presidential guard. And at that very moment, it grieves me to tell you, you can't believe it. That was the first experience that I had. Of course, I brought suit. But do you think for one moment that that person was ever put in jail? And by the way, journalism hasn't grown in stature or in greater respect since then. I won't bore you with the ongoing harassment of which I am a target on the internet, because there are some whose 24/7 avocation is to assault, to discriminate, to dissuade. People are paid for this. It isn't just what flows from their desire for the day. They take a picture of you and suddenly they upload it and they say, I know where you are, I know who you're with, and I know what you're doing. And though I had already lived that, while I was moving closer to the Alejandro Gianmattei presidency, because later under Jimmy Morales, I was threatened with humiliation, and it came from the head of defense. There was a question of $50,000 or $60,000 that was being offered to offer anybody to come rape me. And it was a call put out to the public. But after this hit the international milieu, the tone was much cruder and scarier, so that I ended up practically cloistered at home. I certainly didn't leave the country. I didn't show myself publicly. And the idea that I might have private protection was also out, because the people who had been protecting me were threatened with continuing to work with me. I was being called, I was receiving video calls with the logo of the chain with which I work, where I saw a man jerking off before the camera, telling me that he was doing it thinking of me and my family. What can I say? For mental health, and by the way, that is a huge topic that we might spend time discussing, all I knew that the only thing, at one point, the only thing that I felt was still mine was my telephone number in Guatemala, because in September of 21, I started investigating Alexander Gianmattei. It started there, and it has gotten worse every day. Even the United States, that is trying to protect me, I am still receiving threats of rape from Guatemala. So what I'm saying is that when you draw up the list of aggressions that we as women are particularly prone to do anything to shut you up, perhaps forever, but to scare you to death in the meanwhile. The list is long. I know my sisters in Guatemala are still fighting, but we need international financing, because what has happened is that everything dried up, and that's what happened to my newspaper. It closed. Nobody was buying anything. And so what do we have now? There are other means of communication that are covering these massive demonstrations that are going on in the heart of Guatemala City, that come from all of the original peoples. All of the indigenous peoples are out marching, because let me tell you, there is a huge political crisis that is going on. But we're not going to be able to carry it alone. We need stronger and more focused international attention. And it is hard. It makes me want to weep when I think that others with the most minimal article may also have to exile themselves. I don't wish it on you, Lorenzo, but you and I know that's where we're headed if things continue as they are.
En ese contexto,
well, in that context, the question as to how we maintain the economic independence of such papers, along with the others that are financed by elites, what do you do? I don't know if somebody can find the last message that I sent. There are young groups that contract. There are groups that identify where you are, and that would not happen if you didn't have state support. Who, I ask you, has the capacity to go into your phone through Pegasus to find out where you are, with whom you are, what you're doing, who are your friends? What can I say? I have tried more than once to come as close as I could to the head of networks to report on the fact that this is what is happening and it is not getting better. What was happening with Enrique Peña Nieto in Mexico is happening in spades in Guatemala. It is happening as I speak. And that also goes to the Foundation Against Terrorism. Friends, the Foundation Against Terrorism, Fundación contra el Terrorismo, is a criminal organization. It has a nice label, but it isn't what it says it is. These are the people who, touting that particular MO, are out there to kill off any independent thinker, whether you're in justice, whether you're in journalism. How can you possibly be talking about 80 persons who were only seeking a fairer way forward? And more are suffering because they are daring to speak out. This is getting worse by the day. It is grievous. I have no words to describe it. The last time that I was able to hug my family was in 2022 on March 3rd. You do the math. Last time I saw my family.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jacques de Rosier. I hope I am pronouncing your name properly. We know that you are the General Secretary of Haitian Journalists, and we know that is the oldest, most venerable press group in Haiti, 1955. Since then, a lot of water under the dam. And one of the journalists we know who was most affected by the ongoing acts of violence that have been perpetrated even very recently by armed gangs running rampant in Port-au-Prince. And we know that you yourself, alas, had to flee your home to keep safe. So welcome, friend, welcome Thank you for answering this invitation. We are honored to have you among us. Let me ask you flat out, what measures do you consider most urgent and essential to guarantee the safety of journalists in Haiti, especially in those areas that are under the control of criminal gangs? Thank you very much. To speak of the situation of journalists in Haiti, one must begin by trying to sketch a picture of their general position. It has now been well over 5 years that the level of insecurity in the country has risen like the morning sun, through kidnappings, through assassinations, through armed conflict between rival gangs. So gang warfare very often turned against the civilians, with very serious consequences, of course, for journalists and the general practice of journalism in Haiti. Many, many, many journalists, as you can imagine, have been targets. Many have been attacked, one from a French press, people that came out with machine guns and various different rifles. It's the case of the press, Janelle Lotte, Nessim, Malise Bonhomme, and her husband, Jalawopo, who were kidnapped. They're gone. We don't know where they are. Others have had to flee the country, flee for their lives, because the violence and the increasing grip of the gangs has spread and spread, and Julie Joulagneau has paid the price. Most recently, other journalists have had to flee their homes, again, to escape chaos. Others yet have simply left the country as quickly as they could. Alas, this has become a general and increasingly chaotic situation, such that today in Haiti, we see the security forces, despite their best efforts, in a situation of virtual impotence. So any hope of restoring security that would be essential, I'm sure we all agree, to allow journalists to do their job in Haiti is at present beyond us. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And to follow up, let me, says the moderator, ask you then, what impact do you think might be had on freedom of expression in Haiti? The security mission led by Kenya that has most recently been agreed to by the UN. Do you think that'll help? What will that Kenyan peace mission do you think? Well, it could be useful, answers the Haitian guest. We know that previous UN missions in Haiti have helped. We know that they were useful to an extent when they were there. But we would hope that the UN looks at what it has done and how it has done it and learn from it. Because whoever goes to Haiti had better know what is happening in Haiti. It isn't a question of sending off people to Haiti for the UN. You better have a sense of what's happening. And I say that with the greatest respect. Because in point of fact, let me say, to an extent, some of what is occurring here is the result of previous UN missions in Haiti. There wasn't this kind of insecurity that as there is now. It's been several years since the previous UN mission. And yet again today, we are in pretty much the same pickle, because what was aimed for never happened. So I'm saying with the greatest respect, the UN must focus on the real needs of Haiti. You can't come in with a blueprint of what Haiti needs. What Haiti needs. How about looking at the results on the ground and what we say we need? Thank you very much indeed. With that statement, says the chair, I think we must now begin to close this grievous session on death, exile, and jail. And there is, alas, a common link here, is there not? And that is the desire to silence by any means. Sometimes the perpetrators are agents of the state. Other times, in areas that crop up for different reasons, as we see in the case of Haiti today, criminal gangs, the state has lost all presumption of power. The place is stateless, but armed gangs have filled that vacuum. But in any event, there has to be some desire to reverse the situation and to ensure that sanctions are brought to bear. I want to pick up very briefly on something that each of you said.
Aaron, you were talking about the similarity between violations worldwide. Countries, in different countries. I think it'd be, perhaps you can delve deeper into that or underscore that. And Juan Lorenzo talked about the kangaroo court. The trial was a circus. This is the same thing in Venezuela, by the way. I think it's another part of unbridled power, and it's a consequence of unbridled power. And Jose Carlos, you talked about censorship. Killing one and effect on others, and going into exile, and the self and self-censorship resulting therefrom. And Bertha added,
a los desafíos tradicionales le agregó el adicional.
Okay, and then additionally, the special rapporteurship, I believe, has to pay particular attention to a lot of these issues that I've raised, and perhaps produce a report on the subject matter. And with regard to Jacques de Rossier, with regard to Haiti and the new UN security mission, should aim to improve and not worsen conditions on the ground. We want to thank everyone for your presence, your attention, for joining us, and this session is now adjourned. Good afternoon.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Thank you very much we're going to move on to the next panel. I'd like to invite for this panel Agustina del Campo, Director of the Freedom of Expression Study Center, a global center that focuses on this particular right. I'd also like to invite up to the head table here Eduardo Bertoni, the rapporteur for freedom of expression, or former rapporteur for freedom of expression, Ignacio Alvarez. I must point out that Catalina Botero, for health reasons, is unable to join us today, but she sends her warmest greetings to the audience. She is ill-disposed, and in her stead, we have her replacement who will be arriving soon. And these are the ex-rapporteurs for freedom of expression that will be up on the stage here together. And we're very pleased to have them all.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro, for the invitation and for the introduction. This panel closes out 2 days of difficult discussion, 2 days of panel discussions that expose the true status of freedom of expression in the world, and in our region particularly. Inasmuch as last year, our region held the record for more murdered journalists worldwide. So, I, at least, am going home with profound grief, very, very moved by this situation and troubled by it. And seeing that, but I'm glad to see that there are institutions like yours and persons like the Special Rapporteurship for Freedom of Expression of the ICHR and others are rising to the challenge and are trying to do something about it and soften these blows and do something to save our democracies in such a state of play. And in this spirit of gratitude, I am pleased this afternoon to represent this panel, and this is the 25th anniversary of the Special Rapporteurship for Freedom of Expression of the OAS. And at the event we held, where the unveiling of the statute commissioned by the rapporteurship of the 500 some odd murdered journalists to pay tribute to them yesterday, there was an interesting thing how things are summed up. The violence and murder of the journalists is what gave rise to the Special Rapporteurship for Freedom of Expression 25 years ago, and this is an issue, a topic, sadly, is still relevant today, 25 years later. And so this tribute, on the one hand, helps to us to remember the victims. We truly hope that not one more name is added to that list. But also, in the OAS garden, we recall the importance of this institution to protect freedom of expression and to view and visualize measures that can be taken. So in the face of these systemic challenges we still are facing, those brutal challenges that are upon us still, of the murder of journalists and violence against them, there's so many other challenges in terms of freedom of expression, much more subtle, but run deep in the democracies of our region and in the expression of democracy in our nation. And the rapporteurship, each one of the rapporteurs that we've been lucky to have in the rapporteurship did an important, performed a performant job in showing how freedom of expression cuts across everything and has in the different social protests, criminalization of social protests, freedom of gender expression, transparency and accountability, freedom of expression and economic, social, and cultural rights, freedom of expression and internet and social networks, which is where much of the democratic debate today takes place. Personally, I was fortunate to support you in your during your terms. Eduardo Bertoni, for example, at the rapporteurship. Santiago, was the first one of first rapporteur, but I wasn't present with him. But I was with all the other ones, and I witnessed one way or not, but pretty directly, of the deeply rich work that has been done by this office, this rapporteurship, particularly region-wide. Without further ado, I don't think these people require further introduction. Eduardo Bertone, former rapporteur for freedom of expression, and now he is a coordinator of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights, and Ignacio Alvarez, also former rapporteur for freedom of expression, and NHR legal, based here in Washington. Edison Lanza, who is Pedro's immediate predecessor as the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, and who's now a fellow at the Inter-American Dialogue, senior fellow that is. Am I forgetting anything or anyone? No. Okay, so let's move on to the questions that I've been asked to pose to you. I'm going to begin with one to sort of stretch out and make this conversation a little more informal. I want to begin by posing you the question about a specific anecdote during your terms. If you could share with us 25 years out since the creation of the Special Rapporteurship. Who wants to start? A story. Could you tell us an anecdote? My voice is almost so hoarse you can't understand me, but I'm going to see what we can do. But I'm glad I at least made it here, sort of, to this last panel. Among all the other rapporteurs, I think that Catalina was affected by the cold last night, and she was a casualty of the weather. So I wanted to refer to one thing, and then maybe any other anecdotes I might be able to tell that have to do with one comment. I once heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, or whether it's fake news or not, that Borges once in Borges.
El Corán no.
Yeah.
Esto es cierto.
Nobody knows if it's true. It was something that Borges, the Argentine author, said. But he said, some things are so obvious sometimes. Sometimes they go without saying. He said something that seems so obvious. And it's something that affects me. But what I wanted to say, but when we became a rapporteur, Santiago was after me, when I began this, aggression and murders of journalists was a subject, was an issue. And now we just unveiled a memorial on the same topic, same theme. I think the courageous thing in this tragedy is that none of us have abandoned the struggle with regard to this. It continues to be visible. We continue to shed light on it, and it's the only way we can have any kind of hope to be able to bring down the degree of attacks and violations of the rights of journalism. The worst thing we could do is given everybody, not only just all of us, rapporteurs for freedom of expression, is just cease to attach importance to it. That's why the rapporteurship, it's important to continue to work on this. It's important. This memorial is important. It's important that UNESCO have programs and specific days that recall this problem. We cannot forget the murdered journalists, their families, the exiled journalists, for 1 minute. The day we do so, rest assured that there will be no solution to the problem. The anecdotes, I got a whole bunch of them, but linked to this has to do with issues that in my office position, there's certain dramatic positions that one has to face. Situations of assaults on journalists, and one that happened in Guatemala when I was the rapporteur. I can't remember what had triggered the conflict exactly, but the conflict had ended up with journalists who had been abducted by criminal gangs. I don't know if they were asking for ransom or what, but it was getting real violent, and the government was doing nothing to even negotiate for the release of these journalists who were being held hostage. And so my phone would receive any time of the day. I was told, call me anytime, because we know that these people are being held, they're kidnapped. They're starting to drink. And once they get to a certain point after drink enough, they may not be in their right minds. And since they were handling machetes were lingering or hovering around, one doesn't know what could happen. So who knew if they were going to be macheted to death? So I received a call in my office. I called the ambassador, the government. I spoke with the media. I speak with everybody. I try to plead, urge the government, beg to sit down at the table with them. They didn't know. I didn't know whether I should take a flight and go. And I don't know if you can imagine what you feel, the anxiety. But after a while, I did conduct a visit to Guatemala. I eventually did. And who was it? If a colleague from Guatemala remembers, who was the Prensa Libre was the media outlet that is. I can't remember exactly who was there at that media outlet, and I was approached by two people who I didn't know, and they thanked me because they say to me, "Jade, thanks to your efforts, I was released." And it had a happy ending, this anecdote, but it could have ended up in a tragic, with a horrible, brutal, bloody end. And so sometimes there's actions we take that, and people are widely known by the public, but sometimes there are little things that are done, and you never know that they may have a felicitous or dramatic and a very happy ending, as this did. This is an anecdote that I wanted to tell because it had a happy ending, which is why I wanted to relay it to you all. Okay. Good afternoon. I got here late. It was a disaster. Thank you, Ignacio. So firstly, I'd like to publicly recognize, as I said to Pedro and the team of the rapporteurship, it was very important what was done yesterday. And so the CIP, IAPA, my colleague was there too, a recognition and a place where we can recall this tragedy and remember the victims of those who fought together with us and all the achievements. It's a great achievement of the rapporteurship. And as Augustina asked, I don't know if I can come up with something, an anecdote, but I don't want it to sound frivolous, but we live with frustration, feeling powerless, because the rapporteurship, I think it opened, Ignacio or Catalina, one of them, is during their term. We began to be systematic when there was a murder of a journalist. We issued press releases and remind states of their obligations, and as firmly as possible we responded to it. And so when I was in the murder of quite famous journalists, for example, remember the case of Paul and the Universo team, the precautionary measures and kidnapping that was issued in the areas, and then we found out that there hadn't been a meeting of Javier Valdez in Mexico and Ruben Espinosa. How could I forget? I'm going to be forgetting one of the several, but what more could we do? That was one of the issues in this position. We always question ourselves. Could we have done more, etc.? And so the thing was to try to get to the ground as soon as possible, on site. And of course, it's crazy. We're sitting here in Washington, and then a case crops up, and we had issued a press release that there was a serious situation, but the state didn't heed our recommendation to prevent it. But with regard to Ecuador, there was the civil society, Cesar knows, obviously Ricardo remembers this. We insisted that in the framework of the precautionary measures that an independent investigation body would be created, in addition to the recently begun investigation of the state. The state ended up accepting it, and there was funding for this mechanism, and it was accepted by the commission, and it was a bit crazy because there was no planning for it, and we had to go down there with a team, an independent prosecutor and investigator 3 or 4 times. We went to the scene of the crime, and in the midst of this, we held hearings, follow-up hearings, and we were quite harsh with the state when we presented what the failures of the investigation underway by the state was. And so we ended up issuing a report where we summarized what were the reasons and where were the violations of due process rights that were violated in the investigation, etc. In that report is the response to what happened, and unfortunately the state did not follow the recommendations, and has continued. 2 years ago, for example, committed the same errors. And in the case of Nava and Javier, with the rapporteur of the UN rapporteur, we immediately traveled to Mexico, and Artículo 19, we went down and we worked hand in hand with Article 19. There were more than 30 murdered journalists in 30 journalists who were murdered, and it was a massacre in Veracruz. And we put together that in-local visit in weeks, within weeks, you know, it's not easy to pull off an in situ visit. We went to Sinaloa, Chihuahua, in addition to Veracruz and Mexico City as well, and another location that I can't recall. And it was a report there that also had so much in it. And then Jeanette Bedoya's case, as well as a matter of violence against women, the sexual abuse against women journalists, aside from the other, most of you are quite familiar with that case. And I worked a lot in cases that haven't been resolved. Vladimir Harsoga in Brazil, in the case of Carvajal in Colombia, Nisabon in Paraguay, that still don't have a final disposition. So when a rapporteur maps something out, it's because we see how complicated it is for everything that happens. Each one of you will say how things happen. I had a lot of stuff in mind, but I tried to be the champion of freedom of expression, and then I tried the smearing of journalists. I tried to counter that and shed light on that and all and that whole there must be a recording. There's an American who presented a dilemma, and that we're going to her harsh press release against the President of the United States is what we decided to do, despite we decided not to do it in the end, but it wasn't one of my plans originally to issue a press release against the President of the United States for violations of freedom of expression. But as I said, that isn't something I planned. So I'm going to keep to just the anecdote, request for an anecdote, a suggestion by Agustina. On the Inter-American Commission, there's been since there's 7 members of the Commission. Their impediment, they're banned from working on any matters related to their own country. The rapporteurs, special rapporteurs, though, we are not banned from doing so. I am a Venezuelan, and so I was allowed to deal with Venezuela. And this was during the Chavez era, right in the midst of the Chavez era. And it was very complicated with regard to freedom of expression. It was an important part of my work to be issuing pronouncement and CNN and press releases I was issuing and work on cases at that time on the most important television networks of Venezuela. But so this is independent about, and regardless of how the Venezuelan government was going to react, even though I was outside, they had never thought to me that we were going to cancel my passport back then. Now, they wouldn't have done that back then, but I never thought that would eventually happen. But this constant clashing one way or another with the government. Ignacio Alvarez, the rapporteur, they said that he's an undercover CIA agent. They accused me of being. But in the midst of all that, I was invited to eat arepas one Saturday morning. In the midst of all this, somebody who I met in the halls. And so what should I do? Should I go or not? But what can I be told? It could be poison arepas could be given to me or something like that. Who knew? I mean, so I thought it over. I've got to go. And it was a very cordial encounter. And in the end, Ignacio, rapporteur, I haven't asked you, why are you really hitting us hard with all you've got? And how was I supposed to react, Ambassador? It was the ambassador in Venezuela. I said, but I'm not doing anything different from what I do with other countries. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And parenthesis, this is when Chavez had gone to the UN after and had said that it smelled like sulfur because Bush had just been up on the dais. And so, remember that time? So if we criticize the government of the United States, We're equal opportunity criticizers, is what we are. But you continue doing your job, and we'll do ours, of course. But that's the anecdote that I want to tell you. These Venezuelan arepas, who I thought that might have been poisoned.
Bueno, perfecto. Bueno, una...
Right. Well, I'm sure you have some thousand, if not several thousand, stories of this type. And each one would evoke wonderful, wonderful, stirring work that each of you have done. Thanks to Catalina, thanks to all of you who were with us over these 2 days, who have seen us through, and including the commemoration and the lovely ceremony we held yesterday evening. I express my gratitude to each of the three of you, and with this, I'm pleased to hand over the microphone to Pedro, who will move us into the closing ceremony. Thank you very much, Catalina, Edison, Santiago, who have been with us steadfastly throughout, and especially this afternoon. I'd like to have Guillermo Canela come to the head of the room, the head of the Freedom of Expression Unit at UNESCO. Guillermo Canelo, I ask to come here first. Again, this is the Chief of Freedom of Expression, Security of Newspaper, Man of Journalists at UNESCO. A lot of people have asked me what the result was, who won the soccer game between the journalists, between the Democratic Republic of Congo. I got the score. Are you ready for this? It's 0-0. Now, I had the enormous pleasure of working with the rapporteurs throughout these years, and in my past life, in several past lives, I used to work with the rights of children and the protection of boys, girls, and adolescents in Latin America. I met Eduardo at that time at an event in Brazil, and particularly when we speak about such truly daunting, horrible things as we are discussing here, it is certainly easy to ask yourself, well, good Lord, what works? What works? Surely nothing works. Look at where we are. Well, I like to look at history from the lens of possible results. The idea here is to prompt yourself and ask, what would have happened if X event had never happened? And so if we take the rapporteurship on freedom of expression out of the equation in Latin America or in the Americas in general, what would have happened with regard to freedom to information without the model law? What would have happened without the rapporteurs, men and women, defending these cases at the Inter-American Court? What would have happened with the setting agenda in the 21st century without the hemispheric agenda for freedom of expression? And if by chance you arrive at the conclusion that things would have been mightily different without the rapporteurship, then I think you're saying the rapporteurship has fulfilled its task. Now, that is not to ask whether things couldn't be better. That's a very different question, because you know what? Things can always be better. But it is also true that they could be worse. And when we're talking about democratic consolidation, when we look at what it means to push for an agenda that is constructive at the institutional level, then I think it is fair to say we are better girded to face the present and certainly the future than we might otherwise have been. Sure, let's think of the best possible framework within which to move forward. The future will surely be complex. It always is. But it seems to me at the present time we have two major challenges. One, we've got to save our democracies, and two, following close behind, last but not least, got to save the planet. And for both of these enormous tasks, freedom of expression is central. To save democracies, it's clear. How can you have democracy if you don't have freedom of expression? However, if you look at the huge challenge that the environmental crisis puts upon us, if we continue to be deluged by disinformation, unverified information, without any true freedom of expression and truly quality journalism, we're not going to do it. We're just not. We're going to miss it. Totally miss the mark. And good luck to those who survive after us, because we won't be here to see it.
Muchas gracias, Guillerme. En este punto yo quisiera...
Well, on that point, I'd like to ask the Joint Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Human Affairs Commission, Jorge Mesa, who has been tasked by the committee to come and speak to us. Thank you very much, Jorge.
Buenas tardes a todos y todas.
Good afternoon, and on behalf of the Executive Secretary, Renan, a very warm welcome to you even now, and greetings and our gratitude for all of you who have come to participate in this wonderful dialogue on freedom of expression. Mostly for the rapporteurs, some have had to leave, but you certainly have bequeathed an enormous legacy, Pedro Vaca most in particular, and the enormous hard work that I have seen for myself he has undertaken over these last days. It is a huge honor for us all, the Inter-American Commission, and everyone who stands within it, to greet you and to stand together to come to the end of crimes against journalists. And when we hold the 25th anniversary of the International Day to fight against crimes against journalists, we do so with pride. We have done throughout this quarter century as much as we could. It is true that having a special rapporteurship on the subject is a big help. Besides the Commission, the Special Rapporteurship has a unique status, not only with regard to its autonomy, and that, of course, stands for a lot. I needn't tell that to this audience, but also because it means that we select an expert to lead that rapporteurship for 3 years, in some instances renewed, another 3 years, which has happened on occasion. But the point is that we wish to avail ourselves of the experts, male or female, to ensure that public civil service is as professional as it can be. And that is something that we absolutely wish to have in the Executive Secretariat. We want people who have a knowledge of the ground, of what's going on, of how best to serve as the most authorized and authoritative voice on such a subject as this, which is so closely linked to democracy. This special rapporteurship is fundamental. It is absolutely essential to the work of the Executive Secretariat, and this goes to the heart of what the Commission has tasked for itself. Besides anything else, there is a very, very close connection with the Executive Secretary and opens the possibility of ensuring that the mandate of the Commission is met. To begin with, there is a daily monitoring on the status of freedom of expression in the Americas. It's the one who knows what's going on, what voices have risen. Really looks at each single press communique, the positioning on the internet, and so many denouncements of violations of human rights that come up right and left. I also want to say how many work visits have been carried out in the midst of protests in Nicaragua in 2018, but also in Chile when things fell apart, in 2021 in Colombia, and most recently in 2022 in Peru. Really has become, without a doubt, the most specialized, sharply honed part of the Secretariat in response to protests. It has been essential in developing the standards that we have and that you see patent in each one of the press communiques that flow after each of the visits. These, in turn, are linked to democracy. That is without going into the details on democracy and Rele's responses there, which also reflect the position of the Commission and this Executive Secretariat in a number of domains. The reports that are developed by Rele under several issues and covering an array of subjects also reflect the work that the Executive Secretariat carries out, very, very closely linked with those who are also involved. Aside from reports on countries, we also pick up on thematic visits, which sometimes are convened by Rele itself, but regarding which the rapporteur has a critical role to play to explain what is happening with regard to freedom of expression in that context. It is also important to recognize the role that Rele has played with regard to precautionary measures, new means of proceeding, a new twist to this mechanism, any way that we know we will be able to help people at risk better and more effectively. Let me say that what this system has done for journalists throughout the hemisphere, journalists who might have been thrown into jail, who might be considered criminal because they raised their voices, because they marched, is something that in and of itself has to be applauded and for which every one of the rapporteurs present here must be thanked. The special team for the follow-up on precautionary measures in Ecuador after the tragic assassination of journalists at El Universo is also to be noted. Precautionary measures also adopted after the assassination of Don Felix Bruno Pereira in Brazil should be remembered as well. Rele's role in the development standards in the case of petitions and cases is hefty as well. Rele has been instrumental with regard to consolidated positions on freedom of expression. That has been and shall continue to be essential to buttress the position of the Commission with regard to the use of criminal law in the interest of public interest, in the interest of the public in general. We know Club Reyes against Chile. We see the case of the first international organ that recognized the right to information. And as a direct result, I want to say, of the work of Rele under violence. And most recently, in the case of Quinet Bedoya, which against Colombia, we saw just what the outreach of the special rapporteurship could be when we see a cross-sectional understanding of Article 13 of the Convention, not least as it applies to female journalists at risk in many of our countries. Fourth, I'd like to underscore the role of Rele as a means of better understanding the Commission through its executive committee. Take a look, for instance, at the digital milieu, which has already fallen under our aegis, exceptionally so in the dialogue in the Americas on freedom of expression. Rele is known to be the most specialized entity within the Commission and one which can be the engine to drive us forward in the digital world as we know it today. Fifth and last, let me underscore the fact that the qualifications of the special rapporteurship are not limited to promotion and protection of expression, freedom of expression outside the Commission. It is also important within the Commission and within the Executive Secretariat in order to improve our own transparency and accountability vis-à-vis each other. You may be certain that Rele will continue to be at the forefront of that fight, and we shall not stand back with regard to strengthening the Commission. Let me now come to an end simply to say that we are at a crossroads. It's clear that a constant development of standards with regard to freedom of expression have to be tailored to the needs of the region. But these must, at the end, allow more voices, more voice. More voices, more listeners. And greater, too, the responsibility of those who are in power, and yet allow hostile or discriminatory discourse. Not tolerated here. The Rapporteurship of Freedom of Expression, the Executive Secretariat, and the Commission as a whole, I am very sure, will continue to live up to the expectations of us all, where it comes to responding to hate speech and ensuring excellence in the field of journalism, attention to vulnerable groups who have a right to tell their own story as they see it, and also to speak against censor, who will always want to call out for more justice in a world that is so often less just. So let us keep at it. Let us not give up. Let us keep fighting for democracy and increasing the trust of the citizens in democracy, particularly when we see such instances of a deliberate and a coordinated attack against democracy. We thank our executive secretary's position, who has said that really will continue to be up to the task. The links between the Special Rapporteurship and the Executive Secretariat, we think, offers the perfect occasion to put our heads together to offer more coordinated and more timely responses, thereby being ever more effective, more sharply honed, so that the main commission of this group be met to respond to more rights with more people, more rights. May you celebrate many more quarter centuries of good work and great success. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, secretario ejecutivo adjunto.
Finally, thank you very much on my part to work with all of you, the Executive Secretariat, and each one of you. And thank you so very much to all who have taken the time to send us happy birthday messages on this first quarter century for a special rapporteurship and freedom of expression. Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to one of us.
You and your office on the 25th anniversary of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. A quarter century of promoting freedom of expression and information as a cornerstone of democracy across the American continent. We are both still youngsters, I like to think, with my own institution, the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media, having commemorated its 25th anniversary only last year. During these 2.5 decades, the media and information landscape has seen significant technological changes, developments that have deeply altered the way information is produced, shared, and consumed. Internet has brought many new opportunities and many new challenges. Like you, I firmly believe in the fundamental role of regional institutions to set high standards for the realization of democratic values and human rights, especially in light of these evolving developments. And like you, I'm proud of the joint efforts we have undertaken to this end, most importantly, in the framework of our annual joint declarations. This is a valuable example of international cooperation in media freedom advocacy and standard setting. They provide recommendations to a range of stakeholders, thus highlighting the need for a whole-of-society approach. And they have become important points of reference for international, interregional, and national human rights bodies and courts. Today, we focus on violence against journalists and the integrity of elections, a topic that rightfully warrants our attention, with more politicians and public officials than ever attacking and harassing media workers, who are so crucial to our democracies. I will not stop repeating it. Journalists must be able to do their important work in safety and without fear of attacks or reprisals. Public leaders, from their side, must do all to ensure a safe and enabling environment for the media. I wish you all an interesting exchange and thank you for your attention.
Yo quisiera agradecer muy especialmente a Edison.
Let me address Edison, Ignacio, and Guillermo and thank them for being with us today. And now allow me very briefly to move to a few closing remarks.
Bueno, estamos a 3 de noviembre.
This is November 3rd. It's late afternoon. For those of you who haven't noticed, and for this special rapporteurship on freedom of expression, this is not closure, it's a new beginning. And I'd like to share with you a couple of things that have become very clear to me this week. The first and most important, perhaps, is that we have managed to convene here a broad, diverse, and vibrant community on freedom of expression, including UNESCO, that of course includes very much a vibrant Latin American and fully American from north to south component. And certainly it is uplifting, and I know you will stand with me in that belief, that we all are rooting for the same thing. We believe in freedom of expression as the basis for our own respective democracies. None has been destroyed where freedom of expression has prevailed. I'd like also to deeply appreciate the very hard work that has been done, not least when the going gets tough, as the saying goes. I remember a particular text that talks about una agenda hemisférica por libertad de expresión, que Daniela Botero spoke about, and I might not have quoted that verbatim, but the sense is that there has been a renewal of democracy in the Americas going back to 2009, marked by the death of the Cold War and the sunsetting of so many horrible democracies from dictatorships, the interpreter corrects herself, from north to south. Indeed, you know, some people felt, oh, well, the Cold War, that's not us, good luck. But it involved us all. I started my second mandate, and I am convinced that freedom of expression is truly under assault. And if there will be a return to genuine freedom of expression, it won't be happenstance. It will be because we have snatched it from the jaws of the opposite forces. So thanks to all of you for what you do. Let me also thank the very small team that works with me and that has put in by many, many extra hours than those we usually put in, but that have been immensely gratifying. And above and beyond what I might have contributed, I can tell you that I am flanked by people who deeply, deeply believe in the principles for which we all stand and which gather us here. So let me tell you that this very week, the Inter-American Commission has started to meet, and we will have hearings as of next week. And those hearings will be held, some of them in these very rooms. The rapporteurship has its 3-year plan prepared and it has been, I'm pleased to say, approved by the Commission. And some of the ideas that were pushed for here have been taken up and approved, including challenging the slaps. That involves technology, it involves a steady gaze, it involves guts, it involves tackling the terrible issues of exile and or unending jail or torture to journalists. And it's the sort of standing up for rights that have to exist and that have to be proclaimed in any democracy that will long remain so. We have to be sure that rights are protected and that when people in power appear to be eroding those freedoms, people stand up and put a stop to it. I must also appreciate the presence of a number of people, and most especially one, if I may say so, Gina Bedoya, to whom I can thank for my passion in freedom of expression. She's been at every one of the meetings, at every one of the sessions, no introduction necessary. But I would never have dipped my toe in the waters of freedom of expression if it had not been for your generosity and your kind invitation to jump in. And everybody knows the judicial decision to which I refer here and what the holding was in the case to which I am alluding. To me, when she's present, I practically see an aura. This is on you, my dear. They're not applauding me, they're applauding you and everything for which you stand. Now, what follows is not simple. Not that anything is simple, but let us say, and say it up front, this is an inter-American community, and I hope Canela will agree if I can say we will next meet in Santiago of Chile on the next May 3rd, Day for International Freedom of Expression. And there we will tackle this issue, and I hope that we will be able to state up front in Santiago of freedom of press and the environment. And that will also be an opportunity for us all to gather and tackle consultative opinions that the court is hatching. I know there are several, including decisions on the Amazon, and I hope that this community will present and bring a lot of good ideas with each of you. We've talked about the year ahead of us as the super electoral year, and that in and of itself is going to spell enormous challenges throughout the region. We will have to work hand in glove with other areas of the OAS, some that are closely following and whose task it is to follow electorate activities. I also want to say thanks for patience, the patience shown me by many states. Including many of you who have intervened over these days. The list of assassinated journalists, I can only hope, will not grow. But God forbid if that happens. You may be certain that the rapporteurship will follow every single detail. Yet again, thank you. Thank you for coming to this House of the Americas. It is your home. It is our home, and I hope it will ever be a platform for us to exchange views freely, as one should be able to do among family. Thank you. The meeting stands adjourned.